Mr. Ratburn is married. I still can't believe it.
Yep, it's a brand new world.
A federal judge has blocked Mississippi's strict new abortion law that bans the procedure after about 6 weeks and makes no exception for rape or incest. While in Missouri, the governor signed into law one almost as strict.
Got that? Laura McQuaid, who runs Planned Parenthood, says that men can get pregnant. Huh. How does that work? NBC, a former news organization, ran a piece over the weekend making exactly the same claim. Claim a man delivered a baby. Keep in mind that no man in human history has ever done that. Seems like a big story. It seems like all of a sudden it's happening everywhere. Men delivering babies. What has happened? Has biology been reordered? No. In fact, it's still true, it will always be true, that only women can bear children. What has changed is that the left has decided to impose its fantasy life on the rest of the country. To do that, it must get the rest of us to lie about science. Amazingly, most of our leaders appear happy to do that, to go along with it. We're not going to go along with that, not because we begrudge other people their fantasies, but because reality is worth defending.
But their parents are so supportive and create kind of such a bubble of love and support around them that they're able to still pursue their passion, even though not everyone in their life necessarily gets it or approves of it. Anyone who is intolerant of this without watching it and learning about it is just scared and should maybe look at what they're scared of, because there's nothing scary about a boy in a dress. That's not scary. It's great.
There's a large group of people in this country who believe life starts at conception and the taking of that life is murder. Why isn't that the case?
That's a difficult question to answer. Everyone's entitled to their beliefs. They are not entitled to infringe upon other people's bodily autonomy.
Women are the most powerful force in the world!
On the 100th anniversary of the House giving women the vote in the United States, women and abortion rights activists in cities across the country took to the streets to say their battle is not finished.
Does anyone here think that women in this country will stay silent while our rights are being taken away from us?
More than 400 rallies were held coast to coast in opposition to new restrictions on abortion.
My body, my choice!
Triggered after a wave of restrictive abortion laws passed in multiple states.
Should a child, a life inside a mother's womb, be killed due to the actions of its parents?
Few people today realize how much the United States is a creation of Christians. The 98% of the settlers to this country were Protestant Christians fleeing persecution. They created the country. And they created it on Christian principles, actually Protestant Christian principles. Every value that we hold dear, equality, inclusion, freedom, are Christian values. Before the Protestant Reformation, you couldn't get to heaven except by going through the Catholic Church. And the revolutionary idea that the Protestant Reformation came up with was called the priesthood of all believers. So there's no priest class between you and the Creator. That was the fundamental Protestant idea. When you think about it for a second, if everybody is a priest, everybody is equal. And it's this idea that led to the freeing of the slaves, to the equality of women, to all the great advances in our culture. In America, for the last 50 years, there's been a dedicated war against Christianity and against believers by the so-called progressive left. In my lifetime, there's never been a darker hour for America. When I left the radical movement, when I saw that radicalism was a destructive and evil movement, I began to re-examine the foundations of this country. And the first thing that occurred to me was that you can't have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness unless there's a God, or unless you have respect for people who believe in God. Atheists could not have created this country. kind of began in 1962 with the Supreme Court decision to remove prayer from the schools. For 170 years, there had been prayer in the schools. But suddenly, without any precedent, the Supreme Court, actually only 6 justices, decided that that was unconstitutional. As a consequence, any child going to a public school cannot be taught. It can't be mentioned that the Pilgrims were actually religious Christians fleeing persecution. We have been stripped of our roots, and that's why you see powerful movements today to suppress free speech coming from the left, racism from the left, dividing our country into categories of skin color and gender and sexual orientation, the very opposite of what the Christian founders of this country believed in.
Fallout surrounding a popular children's show, Arthur. Alabama Public Television refusing to air a recent episode featuring a same-sex marriage.
In the episode, Arthur's teacher, Mr. Ratburn, marries a guy named Patrick. It was scheduled to air last week as the show's 22nd season premiere, but a rerun aired instead.
And I say, hey! This morning, cartoon controversy after Alabama Public Television refused to air the premiere episode of the hit children's series Arthur, which depicted a same-sex wedding of one of its most popular characters.
Who's getting married?
Me.
In the episode, Mr. Ratburn, Arthur's teacher, was seen walking down the aisle with his aardvark partner.
Mr. Ratburn is married. I still can't believe it.
Yep, it's a brand new world.
For the first time ever, Louisville hosted Drag Queen Storytime, but the event didn't go off without any pushback.
All in a battle over books, or rather, who is reading books to children in a literacy program called Drag Queen Story Hour.
Once upon a time. Libraries all across the country have held similar events with drag queens to promote tolerance and acceptance of others.
You sing my house. There are now more than 35 chapters nationwide. Performers with the nonprofit undergo training and in many cases background checks. For Jonathan, the dramatic flair and the kids' curiosity seemed a perfect fit.
Storytime will no longer be led by a drag queen in Leander. A few hours ago, the city canceled an upcoming event at the public library after complaints.
KXAN's Will Dupree found out other events are now being called off or reviewed at the library.
Others insist it confuses kids still learning about gender identity.
And also they're giving a message to others that it's okay to be different, because they are loudly and proudly doing that.
All kids get through that stage where they're suddenly starting to question who they are and how they present themselves to the world. Drag has been actually a really healthy way for her to play with that idea without feeling like she has to mimic anybody. There is a community there, and for a lot of these kids it's just a case of finding the right way to get into it, and again, for all of us, just keeping it age appropriate.
Now, this comes after Alabama became the first state in decades to make abortion a crime in almost every case.
From Alabama to Missouri to Texas and beyond, Republican legislatures are waging a war to unravel a woman's fundamental rights. They are responsible for 300 newly proposed restrictions. We are here to send these folks a message, not on our watch.
A number of Democratic candidates were quick to weigh in on the Alabama law yesterday, calling abortion a constitutional right.
This is an existential fight for the right and liberty to control your own body.
The precedent is clear, and yet they've decided they're going to take away a woman's basic right to make a decision.
It's nothing short of an attack on women's basic human rights and civil rights.
But with this being the most restrictive that we've seen, they're expecting a fight. It's chilling for a lot of people.
One of the things that I explained in the book is how the left, the so-called progressive, liberal left, is really a religion. It's a religious cult. Actually, it's an old Christian heresy, the left is, named after Pelagius, a Christian monk who lived in the 4th century. And Pelagius believed that sin was against human nature. And therefore, if Christians would just be good Christians. If they would just follow their true nature as human beings, they could create the kingdom of heaven on earth without a divine intervention. Pelagius' antagonist was St. Augustine, who believed in original sin, that sin is part of our nature. It's not against our nature. It's the sin of pride that every leftist has inside them, and the belief that they can create a new world where there's social justice, peace, and there's paradise on earth. It's about perfection. So just as Pelagius believed that if you were true to your nature, you would be a good Christian because sin was against nature, modern progressives believe that if you are politically correct, or if the government can force you to be politically correct, you can create paradise on earth. This is the most dangerous and destructive idea in the history of the human race. It's the idea that we confront today, and it's why I've called this book The War to Destroy Christian America. The most important freedom we have, it actually begins with religious liberty, is freedom of conscience. If they delegitimize your conscience and silence you so that you can't speak, you can't defend any of your freedoms. The whole basis of our freedoms as Americans is, first of all, this religious liberty, the liberty of conscience. There's no more important fight than defending the freedom of people to disagree with you. The left is at war with people who disagree with them. The left has declared war on Christianity, and the Christians are on the front line. And it's a very, very dangerous moment in our political history.